Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the extra mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now your hosts, Jackson Mummy and Megan Saya from Celebration Bar Review.
Well, hey, everybody, welcome. We're glad to have you with us. How are you, Megan?
I am doing well, getting excited for Thanksgiving. How about you?
Yeah, I can't believe we're almost there, right? I mean,
Yeah, next week.
how did that happen, right? We just got California results out and New Jersey results out. So we're going to talk about the results in those two states and kind of wrap up the July 2021 bar exam season finally. Isn't it weird that we're talking about July exams in November?
Yeah, always very strange thing for me, for sure.
Very weird, very weird. We are going to wrap up our series today on the 10 hardest MBE questions ever with question number 2 and question number 1. They both were questions that fewer than 10% of the people that have ever taken the question got right. And it's surprising, isn't it? Because they're not as brutal as you would have expected, right?
Yeah, I think this is it's so interesting because it's the first time we've done this series, and it's so interesting to see these patterns of what makes these questions hard. I think pretty consistently in this top 10 is that they're ones that's really easy to talk yourself out of the right answer.
Yeah,
talk
they're not
yourself into the wrong one.
Yeah, they're not the ones that are like extraordinarily complex rule against perpetuity stuff. That didn't even show up. And so I was just kind of stunned. It was like, I thought we were going to do 10 property questions. So
that might be your own personal bias against property.
You think it might be? Maybe we'll do the 10 toughest property questions ever. I don't know. Anyway, we've got that coming up later. We are going to talk about results. Megan, what's going on in bar exam news around the world?
Yeah, so obviously the really big news this week was California results, as expected, were released on Friday evening. And California had a 53% pass rate and a 19% repeater pass rate. So we've definitely seen a bump since California changed their cut score, right? So they lowered the cut score, which was great news, and that has helped. But obviously still California is just the toughest bar exam in the country. It's a rough one.
Yeah, and the pass rates went down 8% from the previous year. And so I love this. The Cal bar examiner said, well, it's not just us, really. New York and Texas had declines, and everybody had a decline. Yeah, nobody had a decline down to where California was. So again, it remains the toughest exam by far in the country. And for repeat bar takers, this has been a consistent pattern. Every big state in the country has been around 20% for repeat bar taker pass rate, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's really, I appreciate getting the hard data that backs up what we have been seeing consistently for years. Jackson, what you've been seeing, I'm sure the trend in the decades that you've been doing bar review, you've seen this trend where we've really calcified, it feels like, at these incredibly low repeater pass rates nationwide.
Yeah, calcified is a great way to put it. This is the new normal. And we've known it anecdotally for decades, but it's gotten worse and worse. And now it just seems to have locked in at about 20%. It almost makes you think the bar examiners all got together and said repeaters are only going to pass at 20%. That isn't what's happened, but that's just where we are. And if you have not watched our series on the 6 keys to jumping into the pass list, I would encourage you to do that. In fact, I'm going to throw it up here on the offer screen. It's a free series, and we look at why people are hitting those numbers. And I think it's important to recognize this because there's just so much just repetitiveness that happens when you're repeating the exam, and you just don't do the right things you need to do. You don't add the extra tools that you need, and you keep bumping your head against the wall over and over again. This study that was done over a couple year span really points to that. And then I think when we take these numbers out of this year's exams, we just see the substantiation of that as a principle. So that's really a problem. There was also a problem, of course, with the technology in California. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it's been really interesting to see how all the different jurisdictions have handled this. There were pretty wide reports of glitches with the exam software. So it was related to memory space problems. And so many people had to stop and restart their computers and their laptops and during the exam. And so What California decided to do was to not give people, some states, very few, but some states gave a little bit of a bump in the score to people who had these problems. Instead, California said if you were one of the people who experienced one of these problems and they reached out to those people who they felt it was significant enough, then you get to take the next exam for free. I don't know how much of a consolation prize that is, to be honest. You know, it's interesting. It's framed. I've seen it framed in non-legal media as like, oh, California's giving a do-over, like a free pass to try again. You know, this is it's a whole nother, 6 months of your life that you're not moving forward as a licensed attorney. So I don't really think it's quite the same as saying it's taking a mulligan.
Yeah, I don't either. And it affected 31% of the applicants. I mean, we're not talking about an insignificant sum here. Now, they said only 2% lost time or content. Okay, but 31% experienced technical issues. So that seems a little bizarre in that regard. And clearly it did have an impact. I mean, I'm seeing in some of the scores, I'm seeing some weird anomalies, right? People scoring 65s or 70s, and then suddenly there's a 50. What happened, right? And I think part of this is the technical aspect. And the examiners in California did not do what they did in some states, which was to reevaluate those scores and bump them up or give some accommodation for them. Response was, as you say, was to give a free retake. That's mind-numbing to me. Again, I think there's a real disconnect between the bar examiners and the reality of what's going on. And I think that they are delusional if they think that that's going to satisfy people. It would not surprise me to see some class action lawsuits against some of these bar exam jurisdictions or against ExamSoft. It's hard for me to understand how after 3 online nationwide exams, ExamSoft couldn't get it right. I mean, that's crazy. When we look at the repeat partaker pass rates in California, I want to just highlight those for a minute because there's lots of numbers to see, and we've given you some of them. But here's what it looks like for repeaters. If you went to a California ABA accredited law school and you're a repeater, your pass rate was only 28%. So still not a great number. If you went out of state ABA, it was 23%. If you went to a California state accredited school, the repeat rate was 15%, and then it drops off the cliff. If you were at an unaccredited fixed facility, it was 10%. If you went to an unaccredited California correspondence law school, right, and I won't name them, but you know who they are, your repeat taker pass rate was 0. Nobody passed. If you went unaccredited distance learning, 10%. And so the overall was 19%. So that's what you've got. If you were an attorney taking just the attorney's exam, only 45% of those passed overall. We don't have a repeat taker rate for them, but that was only 45%. So really, really poor numbers there.
Yeah, it raises some interesting questions. I find the attorney's exam always raises interesting questions for me of these are people who are licensed to practice law in some other state in the US, and in many cases have been practicing law for years. And so it really raises the question of how could it possibly be the case that they are current practicing attorneys somewhere else in the US, but are not minimally competent to practice law in California? That's
not
just
even
my
half of them.
soapbox, but
right, and not even half of them. I mean, you're talking about a lower pass rate for the attorney's exam than for the the overall population. How does that work, right? So there's some real problems there. I also want to talk about what subjects are on the exam. We can release that information now. And I will say, just patting myself on the back, I nailed this exam. I did miss one of the 5 essays, but that's it. I got everything else. The first essay was federal civil procedure, which is exactly what I said. I said it would not be California, it would be a civil procedure, and it would be federal. And sure enough, there it was, federal civil procedure. Why California continues to call this California civil procedure and then test federal rules, beyond me, but they were explicit about that. The second essay was professional responsibility, and here they tested both California and ABA rules. Again, we predicted that, said that would be what was coming, and in fact it was. The third question I also saw coming was torts. It was a pure negligence question, very straightforward, and yep, I told you to look out for that. Number 4 was the one I missed. It was evidence. It was a series of motions to suppress in a criminal law case. I was wishy-washy. I didn't think evidence was likely to be on the test. So, okay, I missed that. And then the fifth one, which I'm very proud of for predicting, was California wills. That was kind of a long shot. Not everybody thought. I remember there was a little discussion, internally about, you sure you want to do wills? Yeah. So it was on the exam, California wills question. Pretty tough question, actually, but there it was. And then the performance test was, as I described, it was a legal audience, persuasive, brief to the court. So there you go. That's what was on the exam. California tough. But then, not to be outdone, New Jersey showed up.
Yes, yeah. So finally, we've been waiting and waiting and waiting for New Jersey. Still not sure what took so long there this go around. But New Jersey finally released their results, and they had a 58% overall pass rate. As of right now, they haven't released a repeater pass rate, but 58%, pretty low, huh?
Yeah, it puts them with California. How does that work, right? So, when we take a look at those numbers, I'm guessing again we'll see the repeat rate at about 19 or 20%. I cannot figure out, though, why New Jersey would be this low. It's the same test they're giving in New York, and in New York, the pass rate is 63% overall. So, it's a pretty big jump between those two states for exactly the same exam, and really drawing on a lot of the same population. So I'm kind of perplexed by all of that. And the same exam in DC had a 73% pass rate overall. So how do you figure that?
Yeah.
It's a weird scenario. I do think something must have happened in New Jersey, and I'm waiting for them to spill the beans and tell us what's going on. But they've been very tight-lipped, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. Not sharing any information about what took so long to get the results out, and then why they think the results just plummeted. I mean, just are so much lower than we would have expected them to be this year, in a year when, as we've said, some jurisdictions did go down, but they went down to more of their normal levels, pre-pandemic levels. New Jersey, this is not a pre-pandemic level for them.
Yeah, so I guess my suggestion is, if you're taking the UBE, don't take it in New Jersey. I don't know. I honestly don't know. But you can't take it in DC now either. So what's going on in DC?
Right. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this later, but I do want to just mention, for anyone who is thinking about taking the bar in DC, they filled up. They had 450 seats for their standard exam. It's in person, obviously, in February, and they are now on a wait list. So they're already full. You can register for the wait list. You won't pay anything yet or actually be registered yet, but you just sort of put your name on the wait list, and they'll let you know if any spots open up. So when we get down, we've got some questions about that, and we can kind of get into what does that look like if you were planning on taking DC and got locked out of the exam.
Yeah, we'll get down there, but we just wanted to highlight that up here for everybody. Okay.
Question: should I make an effort to study the MBE curriculum even though I'm taking the California attorney's exam?
Yeah, this is a good question. And we get it in Georgia. We get it sometimes with Florida only applicants, right? I mean, it can happen. The answer is those multi-state subjects are fair game on the exam, as you just saw in California. So you need to do all of the reading in the multi-state subjects, and you should do the lectures in the subjects. And then what you can skip is doing the practice MBE questions. That, I think, is not necessary if you're just doing day one of the exam. But don't say to yourself, oh, evidence, that's an MBE subject, I'm going to skip it. Don't do that, because it's going to be potentially on your test in your state exam. So that's the process that I would follow there. You want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's great.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, let's move into some study strategy questions. A lot of similar questions this week, which I think is great and kind of shows that people are moving forward with their studies, and they're kind of all, anytime you feel like you're alone and you feel like I must be the only person who's stressed about this, know that we tend to get very similar related questions every week. So You're not the only one thinking that or wondering that. All right, first we have several students who said that they got blocked out of the DC exam, which I think, man, that is make sure to check your jurisdiction and what the rules are. We're still dealing with COVID stuff, even though we're in person. So you need to be on the ball. I'm not blaming the people at all. I'm just as a word of warning, be checking in with your jurisdiction, seeing, does it have caps? Does it have sort of different sorts of rules than you would expect them to have in normal times? And make sure that you are very clear on any deadlines, okay? Like we say this every year, but I think especially right now, I really want people to be aware of what's going on in their jurisdiction. But that being said, for the people who were unable to get into the DC exam because of limited seating, we got some questions about sort of what should their study strategy be now? Should they wait and take the July exam and study a little lighter? Should they take the February exam somewhere else? What do they do?
Well, my recommendation first would be take the February exam somewhere else. The DC exam is the uniform bar exam, so the score would count. If you even wanted to practice in DC, and very few people do, but you could waive your score in. So I would look at taking the exam in New York or Massachusetts or Illinois, or I mean, any place you want. Now, I like some of the smaller jurisdictions that offer the UBE, like Alabama, like New Mexico. They're just easier to maneuver and navigate through. North Carolina is another good jurisdiction. And I think, they're going to grade the exams essentially the same. I mean, I think New Jersey was just an outlier this year. But if we look at the UBE jurisdictions across the country, their pass rates are relatively uniform, aren't they? I mean, we don't see big swings from one jurisdiction to the next. So I don't think the DC examiners are grading differently than the New York examiners. They're all using the drafter point sheets. They're using the same structure. And of course, the MBE is exactly the same everywhere, and it's machine scored. So in my view, if you can't sit in DC, just find another jurisdiction that's convenient for you to sit. Right now, I think I would avoid New Jersey until we figure out what happened there. But outside of that, I think any of the other 30-some jurisdictions would be acceptable. If for whatever reason you've decided that because of this, you don't want to take the February exam, you should continue studying for July. And we have a lot of July 2022 students already in the course. We even have some February 2023. But if you're studying for July of 2022, what you do is you still follow the structure and the order of assignments, but now instead of 25 hours a week, you're dialing it down to about 5 hours a week. And you can take some time off around the holidays. I don't mean shut it down completely, but you can take a week off for Christmas, New Year's, right, without much difficulty. The danger is people that are studying for July get complacent and they think, oh, doesn't really matter. And I'll start in, January, and then January comes along and I don't know, there's something else. And they go, oh, I'll wait. And it's February. And then suddenly you're in the same boat with all the people who've taken the February exam. So don't do that. Continue studying if you're going to do it that way. I'll also remind you that in our course, you can postpone without any penalty as often as you want, at any time you want, and without cause. I mean, just tell us, I want to postpone. But you have to tell us. It does matter. We need to know that. But outside of that, you can postpone. So no worries there. And if you're a UBE student, of course, nothing changes on the jurisdiction from our standpoint. So it's really your choice. But, there's no magic to sitting in DC, or any other jurisdiction, frankly, that's UBE. So go that way.
Wonderful. All right. Next, we had a few students who had some questions with mind mapping. And so I'm going to put these together because we got a question and then we had someone else who had the same problem and came up with an interesting solution. So I will share these. So first, someone asked, is anyone else taking much longer to mind map than the allotted 2 to 3 hours? I feel like it's taking me much longer than that. And someone else was saying I was having a lot of trouble getting the level of detail that I felt like I needed on the mind maps, and it was taking way too long. So they said I print out the entire outline into half sheet sizes of paper and then arrange them on the floor. So they make more of a 3-dimensional mind map rather than writing it out right or putting it on that. And it helps them kind of go through it. But Jackson, what do you suggest for people who struggle with the time that it takes to create a mind map?
Well, I think, I don't want you spending so much time making mind maps that you forget to do the rest of your study, although it is study, right? So there's a real value to that process. I think sometimes people do get too detailed, and I think you want to be careful about that. Now, we offer a product called Bar Maps that contains the first 2 levels of mind maps for every subject in your course. I would encourage you to do that and get those so that you get the first broad level, which is the table of contents that this student was talking about, and you get the next level of the table of contents built into your mind map, and then you can develop it out from there. But in general, the idea of a mind map is to paraphrase. It's to use visuals and color. It's short word phrases. I've seen some people do mind maps where they're literally copying whole paragraphs out of the outline, and that's not the purpose of a mind map, is it?
Yeah, exactly. You want to synthesize the information down. And so if you're not able to do that, it shows you that you need to study the concept more closely because you don't really understand it yet if you can't synthesize it. If all you can do is
Yeah.
say, well, I need all the information in this paragraph in the outline, that's not particularly helpful to you. You need to make it more concise and clear and have it be something that you've created, I think is really helpful where possible.
I think so too. And I would say stay within the timeframes. We've done this enough and long enough. And Megan and I have tracked this process of mind mapping pretty carefully. And we think that the time we're giving you to do a mind map is sufficient. So if you find yourself taking too much time, you're inevitably putting too much information in. So do a lot less information and then add to the mind map as you go along, right? It's an all you can eat buffet. You don't have to put everything on your plate the first time through.
Exactly. I think that's probably the problem that both of these students may have run into where they were saying, oh, it's taking so much longer, is you're probably trying to think, oh, I need to get to a finished product. That's not the point of the mind maps. Your mind map won't be done until you take the test. Basically, you're going to be constantly going back to it and
Yeah.
adding or rearranging or whatever you need that suits the needs of your study. But it's certainly not something that you create a document once at the beginning in 2 hours and then that's it and it doesn't change the rest of your studies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Okay. Then we got a few, continuing our trend of a lot of people saying and asking the same sorts of things. We got a few people who were saying this week in group coaching calls or in emails to you, just having trouble fighting FLA, still wanting to do IRAC or do kind of a hybrid of it. You know, one person saying that kind of feeling a distrust, which I can understand, like this is so different and I'm not sure that I can fully trust this system, and struggling and realizing that it's something internal with them, right? But that still is like kind of how do you get over that? Even if you recognize I'm putting up roadblocks in my own way, how do you knock them down, right? It's, knowing's half the battle, but it's only half the battle.
It's really tough. It's a great question. I think that part of what happens is that we get um, hypnotized, mesmerized by what we learned in law school. And we think, well, issue spotting worked for me there because I graduated from law school, so I should be able to do the same thing here. And yet, when I talk to people and I say, when have you ever seen issue spotting done in practice? The answer is uniformly never, hardly ever, right? Issue spotting is not rewarded. Let's take a 2-day trial and blow it into a 10-day trial. Let's charge the client 100 hours instead of 10 hours, right? I mean, there's nothing that supports issue spotting. And so when you're an issue spotter, you're writing an extra 500 to 1,000 words on an essay that don't gain you any points. And the proof is in the pudding. If you've been writing issue spotting, you will see that there is a ceiling on your scores. There's just a point at which your scores will not gain any more than that. And you're not likely to pass by continuing to do that. So ultimately, I think you have to be willing to make the change to a different writing style to demonstrate your skill set more effectively. Now, FLA, I mean, I created it, so obviously I've got the pride of authorship, but I've taught it for 30 years to thousands and thousands and thousands of people. It works. I mean, the bar examiners don't look at it and go, oh God, we've never seen this before. This is terrible. Quite the opposite. Really, the point of FLA is it allows you to show off your legal reasoning more than your memorization and recitation. We saw that in Georgia, the last couple of exams where they said it's an open book essay exam. We don't care if you can memorize the law, just show us how you reason using the law. And the people that got that passed, and the people that still kept trying to memorize and recite weren't so successful. So I think ultimately you just have to trust that approach is going to show off your skills better. Not that it's a better approach or a worse approach, but it's a different approach that lets you get a different kind of product on the paper.
Exactly. And I know we've been talking about it a lot with these really, really low repeat pass rates. I attribute a lot of that to people for whom you fundamentally don't understand what you're doing with the essays, like what you actually should, the product that you should be giving, what that should look like. And so to continue to try to give the IRAC product, right, is just, it's not going to magically work. It works for some people, but if it doesn't work for you, there's nothing wrong with you. You need to switch method. And I think that, if you are unclear on it, I know one of the students who asked about this, I have done a personal writing workshop with. And so I know that was the one who said, I know it's me. I know that I can do this, but it's just, I'm this roadblock. But I think some of the other ones who asked, I have not. Come and do the personal writing workshop with me. We spend the first half of the first call usually talking about what does it mean to have a different mindset about the essays. And so it's not, I don't want you to just trust me, right? I don't want you to just trust Jackson. Like, you can, because, I've been doing this for 10 years. Jackson's been doing this for 30 years. Like, we do know what we're talking about, but also, I'm more than happy, and I love sharing with people, hey, here's why. And I think generally, I can generally convert people by the end of that first personal writing workshop call and make them believers that okay, I understand now why you're saying to write it differently, and not just, hey, like, just trust me. I'm not gonna, give an explanation to you. So.
Yeah, I absolutely encourage people to do the writing workshop with you. It does make a difference, and I can see the difference in their work. And most of the time when people start switching over to this writing style, after they've done it a few times, they start to say, I can see the difference in what I'm doing. I think the real danger, just to wrap this up, are the people that try to do a hybrid version. They do a little IRAC and they do a little FLA. That is the worst of all possible worlds. I'd rather you do issue spotting all out, than to do that, because what you're going to do is just make a mess of the thing, and you're going to be frustrated. The examiners are not going to reward it. I have never seen, really literally never seen, anybody successful by trying to use a hybrid version of this. So they're two very distinct approaches to the writing, and they don't work well together. They don't play well together.
Yeah. And I remember in your keys to success on the bar exam discussion, one of the things that the group that studied these New York repeat takers who were successful and unsuccessful found that people who tried to do a hodgepodge, right, and say, oh, I'll take a little bit from this bar review, I'll take a little bit from this, I'll take a little bit from this, they were unsuccessful again on their repeat. So it's really, part of it is you've got to commit and say, okay, this is my training, this is what I'm doing. So
go all in. Go all in. I mean, you're here with us. We know how to get you there. Just, it's so frustrating, isn't it? We've got the tools for you. We know you're trying and you're working hard. Just trust us. It'll work if you just do what we ask you to do. There you go.
It's scary. All right. The last question leads us, I think, nicely into our discussion with the MBEs. This is a student who said they were struggling with the MBEs, even when I have the outline in front of me so they can look up the law, and I'm reading the section I know is being tested, I still catch myself getting them wrong. Do you have any suggestions of what would be helpful ideas on how to break through this?
Yeah, it's really selective intuition, and it's what we've been talking about in these 10 hardest MBE questions ever, is that you have to preview an answer before you look at the answer choices. That is the key to making selective intuition work, as we've seen. If you can preview what your answer is, then you're able to do a better level of quick answering. And I think what happens is people get in, as we're going to see in these two questions today, they're not hard questions necessarily. It's just you overthink them, you overanalyze them, you overwork them, and then you get them wrong. And so by taking a step back and thinking intuitively about them and previewing your answer, you're going to get a lot more right. I would also say, when you're in practice, shut the book when you're taking the questions. I mean, do the questions with the book closed. Don't look in the outline for an answer and then go answer the question. That's not going to really help you much. So I would encourage you to follow the instructions that we've given there. So yeah, it's a good question though. And it's a great segue into our 10 hardest. Are we ready to talk about that?
We are, yes.
All right. So we've been talking about the 10 hardest MBE questions ever. We're finally up to question number 2 and number 1. And I could have reversed the order on these. They're both questions that had fewer than 10% all time of all applicants get these questions right based on our statistics and data points. And so that should be a little terrifying. But I think what we're going to discover is that they're really not very hard questions. So let's jump into the first one. And here we are. I call this question number 2 on our top 10 list. It comes from the lovely world of evidence. And so I'm going to read the question out loud for those of you that are just listening. And I want to encourage those of you watching, either today live or in the replay, to go ahead and work along with us and try and answer these questions. All right, so here's the question. Daniel is on trial for evading $100,000 in taxes. The prosecution offers in evidence an anonymous letter to the IRS, identified as being in Daniel's handwriting, saying, quote, I promised my mother on her deathbed I would try to pay my back taxes. Here is $10,000. I'll make other payments if you promise not to prosecute. Answer yes by personal ad saying, okay on tax deal, close quote. Now the question is, the letter is. All right, Megan, what do we got here when we look at this?
Yeah, so this one is one of those where I think right away, even before it just says the letter is, you should know we're basically going to have to answer, do we think the letter is admissible or inadmissible? Right? And what might be the reasons that pops out for you, right? And there's certainly some things in this short fact pattern that should make you say, I'm not sure what. There's some questions that pop up as you're reading it, for sure.
Right. And I think that's exactly the question. Is the letter admissible? So now, if you're working along with us at home, what we want you to do right now is jump into the chat box and just answer the question, is the letter admissible based on that fact pattern that we just gave you, or inadmissible? And there's the fact pattern, so you can take a look at it again. And if you want to tell us why you think it's admissible or inadmissible, go ahead and put that in as well. But again, we don't want you to overthink this. We want your initial gut reaction to this. And so the question is, again, is this letter going to be admissible or inadmissible? All right, Megan, we get any brave takers in the chat box?
Just one so far.
Oh, come on, folks. You can do it. Be brave. It's a 50-50 chance here. Is it admissible or inadmissible? That's all we're asking you right now. So type it in there. Come on. You can do it. Hopefully we'll get a few others here.
We're getting a few now. Lots of all inadmissibles so far.
Okay. All right. So a lot of inadmissibles. So again, to go back to our idea of how you work through a multi-state question, you start by trying to answer this fundamental binary question. In this case, a yes or no question. And if you've got a reason in your mind, that's great. And hopefully some people said it's inadmissible because, but remember, we haven't shown you the answer choices yet. So you're really just previewing this. And the better you can do at adding your own reasoning, the easier it'll be to find your correct answer. All right, should we look at the answer choices?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so here we go. Answer choice A says it's admissible as a statement of present intention or plan. Answer choice B says admissible as an admission of a party opponent. So those are your two choices. If you said admissible, you might have had one of those two reasons. Answer choice C, and this is the traditional structure, is the opposite conclusion. It's inadmissible because it's an effort to settle a claim. All right. And then answer choice D, it's inadmissible because the probative value is substantially outweighed by the risk of unfair prejudice. All right, so now what we want you to do is look at those answer choices and now make your decision. And again, really thinking about what you put in first. If you don't see, so let's talk about this, Megan. What if you chose inadmissible, but you don't see your reason up there? What should you do?
Yeah, so then you may want to look at the other side. You want to, I would suggest, like, if you were looking for a specific reason and it didn't show up, it may be that you have the answer wrong, that initial answer wrong.
Yeah, and so I think it's important to have that concept in mind, because I know that some people will say, well, I had a reason in mind, but I don't see anything even remotely like that. What do I do now? And in that situation, that's going to be a first clue to me that I may have the wrong ultimate conclusion. And I want to go back and look at those other two now to see if there's something that works. All right, we getting some answers in the chat box?
So far, we've got answer choice B. We're getting a few more now. Kind of some A's, some D, or a D.
Okay. All right, so we're getting a few. Are we ready to look at
more B's? Yeah, they're starting to come in.
All right, we ready to see what the result was? Drum roll. Okay. Remember, this is the second hardest MBE question ever. So remember, we're asking which answer most closely matched yours. So that's the criteria that you're using, right? And here we go. All right. If I get there. Okay. If you chose answer A, you were incorrect. Daniel's statement could be admitted as a statement of present intention or plan if the issue in the problem was whether or not he subsequently made payments in accordance with his plan. But that wouldn't be the reason for admitting the letter. The purpose was to prove that he owed back taxes. So the exception doesn't serve to admit a backward-looking statement such as his promise to his mother. So if you chose A, the idea of this present statement, intention, or plan really fights the facts, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
I think you've got to remember what it is they're asking you about, and I think it's not a commonly wrong answer, but certainly an answer that people sort of jump on when they're not paying enough attention to the facts. All right, let's go on. Answer B, that was correct. Yay! The confetti is blowing. All right. And the explanation is really simple. His statement is an admission of his liability, so it's admissible in that situation as the admission of a party opponent. Now, do we have any B's up there? I think you said we did.
We had several B's, that's really exciting because we had a lot more than 10% of people answered B. So that's great.
And I think in this case, Megan, this is just a case of not fighting the problem. It's just taking it at its face value, right? And not overthinking it. The other part, I think, is what we're going to come to here in answer C. Did we have some answer C people in the chat?
We had a couple.
Okay, so C says if the admission of liability is voluntary and it's not preceded by a claim or a dispute or a threat, then the rule excluding the settlement offers of plea negotiations is not applicable, right? So I think a lot of people know that rule, right? You can't admit evidence of a settlement or a plea negotiation, but there's no fact in the fact pattern that says the authorities were aware of Daniel's tax liability and intended to prosecute it before the statement was made. So in effect, what happens is you're overreading the question. And I think that this is where people who thought that the statement might be inadmissible can get trapped. I think you can take this answer choice or D and go with them, even though there's not a good reason for it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting response. And then answer D is incorrect, which said that the probative value is substantially outweighed by the risk of unfair prejudice. The letter is, in fact, an admission of his liability. So pretty probative, don't you think? I mean,
yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't know. If you answer D, in my mind, and I'm not trying to be difficult here, but I think that's kind of a cop-out answer. I think that in truth, you just have to look at the problem, and it's pretty clear that the letter's got value. And when I see those kinds of probative value outweighing prejudice, that's an answer choice I generally try to avoid, don't you?
Yeah, I think it's like a last resort answer. Like if everything else is clearly wrong, then that's kind of what you would pick, something like that.
All right. So we got a few people that got it correct. Yay for you. If you missed it, here's why. And I think, again, one of the reasons that we might have gotten some more right answers is that we asked you to go back if you didn't see your reason for inadmissibility and look if there was a good reason for admissibility. In other words, it's not an obvious on its face necessarily, but when you start looking at the answer choices after you've made your selection, then it becomes pretty clear, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's really the not overthink, like you said, it's the not overthinking it. Like this person wrote a letter to the IRS saying, I broke the law.
I did it.
So that is pretty clearly an admission by a party opponent. But I think it's like very easy to, I mean, clearly this is less than 10% of people got it right. Like it's very easy to talk yourself out of it and think there must be some other sort of hidden concern or issue here, right? When really I think it's just like, let the facts speak, exactly what they are. And the facts are that someone admitted to committing a crime. And so that's allowed in as evidence.
Yeah, so there you go. All right. So that was number 2. We ready to do the hardest MBE question ever?
Yes.
Okay. And I don't think it's the hardest MBE question ever. I got to say, I mean, statistically it looks that way, but I just don't think it's that tough. So here we go. Here's our number 1 question. Walker, who knew nothing about horses, inherited, I'm going to call it aberloan. You think that's good?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. A thoroughbred colt whose disagreeable behavior made him a pest around the barn, unlike Megan's dog Moose. Walker sold the colt for $1,500 to Sherwood, an experienced racehorse trainer who knew of Walker's ignorance about horses. At the time of sale, Walker said to Sherwood, "I hate to say it, but this horse is bad-tempered and nothing special." Which of the following scenarios would best support an action by Sherwood rather than Walker to rescind the sale? Okay, so what's going on here, Megan?
Yeah, I always think these are super interesting questions when they say which of the following scenarios would support it. So this is when we're putting on like our hypothetical hats, right? And we're saying, let's imagine in turn that each one of these facts is true, like independently, one at a time. And then we're going to figure out which one is most helpful in this case for Sherwood, right? So it's very different. You're not just using the facts that they've given you in the question. You have to one at a time independently evaluate how helpful each of these new ones in the answer question would be to Sherwood.
Yeah, and I would tell you that you don't want to spend an inordinate amount of time on this kind of question. It doesn't have a higher point value, obviously, than any other question. And so it might be one that you circle and come back to at the end when you've got, half an hour left. But it is a time suck kind of question because of this idea that you have to do an independent evaluation. Now, the bar examiners have said that they don't want to give as many of these kinds of questions because they're so tough to do. The nice part here is they don't give you scenario 1, scenario 2, scenario 3, and then say 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 3 and 4. They've eliminated that. But here is the basic form of the question that's still admissible to them or acceptable. So here's what we have to do in this situation. We've got to now first look at the answer choices to see just a little bit about what these scenarios are, because there's no way to preview it outside of that. So let me give you each of the scenarios first, and then I'll show you how we break it down. Answer choice A, or our first scenario, says that in the first race after the sale, Aberlone galloped to a huge lead but dropped dead 100 yards from the finish line because of a rare congenital heart defect that was undiscoverable except by autopsy. So that's our first scenario. Second scenario says Aberlone won $5 million for Sherwood over a 3-year racing career, but upon being retired was found to be incurably sterile and useless as a breeder. All right. Option C, again, a third scenario. So we're not doing a binary choice here. C says after Aberlone had won 3 races for Sherwood, it was discovered that by clerical error, unknown to either party, Aberlone's official birth registration listed an undistinguished racehorse as the sire, rather than the famous racehorse that in fact was the sire. Okay. And then our last scenario is D. A week after the sale, Aberlone went berserk and inflicted injuries upon Sherwood that required his hospitalization for 6 months and a full year for his recovery. Holy cow, what do you do with that? Or holy horse, right? What do you do with that?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure if I should say this yet, but in my mind, I won't get into specifics yet, but in my mind, there are 2 situations that I can eliminate immediately.
Yeah.
Because you're thinking, I want you guys to be thinking as you read this, what is the most helpful for Sherwood, right, in his cause of action here, right, or in his suit to rescind the sale. So Sherwood wants to say that the sale should be, we're going to go back to the way it was before, right? I want my money back. You take your horse back. So I think there's 2 of these that immediately you should throw out of the window pretty quickly.
All right. So there's the question again, right? And remember, as Megan just said, the call of the question is which of the following scenarios would support an action by Sherwood, not Walker, to rescind the sale? All right. Now, here's the way that I would analyze this. I would now set up, instead of the binary approach that we've been using, I would now actually look at each of these scenarios independently. So the first scenario was that there's a death in the first race. So is that a case for rescission and restitution? Or the fact that he's not a stud? Or there was a clerical error, right, about his lineage? Or I just called it horse gone wild. Okay, so there you go. So really what I'm doing is I'm trying to analyze which one of those is the best case for rescission and restitution. And I'm not trying to get into a lot of detail. I want to just kind of keep it at this broader level, because again, we've just looked at those 4 scenarios, but if you can now back away from the question and then put it in this kind of context for yourself, it's actually kind of easier to answer the question, don't you think?
Yeah, I think so, definitely.
Okay.
Don't get lost in the weeds.
All right. So now what do we want in the chat box? And I've got them in order here. The death in the first race is answer choice A. The fact that he is not a breeder is answer choice B. The fact that there was a clerical error about his lineage is answer choice C. And the fact that he goes berserk is answer choice D. So what we'd like you to do in the chat box is put in A, B, C, or D. And if you've got a reason, go ahead and type that in. But I want you to be brave. Okay. So there are the choices, A, B, C, or D. Like you all to type
So
in
far
there.
we're getting A's and C's.
A's and C's.
Which
Okay.
I think is what we have
Yep.
seen historically on this
Yes, it is.
question.
It is. Now all the people going B and D are freaked out, right? But okay. So there's your choices. Type it in. We're getting participation here, right, Megan?
Yep, definitely.
All right. Proud of you guys for doing that. If you're watching later at replay, make sure you're participating as well. All right. You think we're ready to move on?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, let's do it. Answer choice A was the right answer. Well, what do you know? In this situation, this is Sherwood's strongest scenario for rescission. A party seeking restitution has to return or offer to return any property they received in the good condition when they received it. But the requirement doesn't apply if the property was worthless, if it's been destroyed as a result of its own defects. Hard to think of a horse as being property like this, but that's what it is. And that would be the case with Aberlone's heart defect in the first scenario. So what's happening is that, if we want rescission or restitution, this is the best of the choices, right? I mean, the others just aren't going to work very well, are they?
Yeah, which we'll see when we get into those.
Yeah. So if you answered A, do we have any A's out there? You said we had a few.
Yeah, we did. We had several A's.
Look at you.
Yeah.
You answered the toughest MBE question ever correctly. You should be patting yourself on the back and doing a happy dance. All right. Answer choice B. I doubt if we got a lot of B's, but in answer choice, Sherwood might have hoped that Aberlone would make him additional money for his stud services, but he earned $5 million over 3 years, which is a whole lot more than he paid for the horse. So the value of the contract to Sherwood was not substantially impaired, and that's what that scenario suggests. So the principal purpose of the contract was to provide Sherwood with a competitive racehorse. Well, that would have been fulfilled under that scenario, and so that's not a good reason for restitution or rescission, right?
Exactly.
Makes a lot of sense, I think.
Yeah,
right.
I think you could eliminate this and answer choice C immediately.
Yeah.
When you saw in answer choice B, the horse had won $5 million for Sherwood. And when you saw in answer choice C, the horse had won 3 races for Sherwood. That should tell you right there, really hard to rescind the contract when the horse has done above and beyond what maybe he would have even been able to expect him to do.
Right. And interestingly enough, statistically, the not by a wide margin, but most people that missed this question, just barely, the majority answered C, which is really weird to me, because I think, as Megan says, if you just think about it, it can't be C and it can't be B. I mean, it just can't be. So, that's people overreading, overthinking, and overanalyzing. I think that's the problem there. And then answer choice D, which I thought had a possibility. The Sherwood's injuries certainly were severe, but he was warned that the horse was bad-tempered, and therefore we say he assumes the risk. And so the attack on Sherwood also doesn't go to the basic qualities as a racehorse. He could be a great racehorse, but just a temperamental horse. And so I think that's part of the challenge. So that's where we are. If you answered A, good for you. If you missed that, I understand. It's certainly, you're not alone. So that's the crazy part of that. So let's turn my camera back on. There I am. What do you think? We survived that?
We did. I hope people, it's a learning process. So don't be hard on yourself. If you didn't get it, obviously these are really hard. I told Jackson, gosh, maybe we should just do now the easiest ones and give people a little bit of a confidence boost, because I don't want people to go away feeling bad about it. But hopefully you've seen too and been encouraged by these. Even at the hardest, they are doable. They're answerable. They are not impenetrable, impossible questions. And hopefully as we talked about them, it made sense, right? And it was a little bit clearer for people how you would deal with these questions that can kind of trip you up pretty easily and trip up a lot of people.
Yeah, and we may do a deeper dive subject by subject on some questions. That's a possibility to just give everybody kind of a feel for all 7 subjects. But I thought it was interesting to look at the 10 hardest questions and really discover that they are manageable. You don't have to give up in the face of those questions. I actually expected them to be, in many cases, far more complex, far more crazy than they were. It's interesting that sometimes the simpler questions just can throw you because of the way the answer choices are phrased or fighting the facts. And I think what happened is that when we use our methodology and we force you to make a decision before you've looked at the answer choices, it really changes the outcome, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So
All right,
hopefully this was helpful. I mean, we're getting good feedback in the chat box, and I know
great.
people have sent lots of sweet emails and notes about it. So yeah, continue to let us know, if there's other things, other series that you'd like us to do. We just really want to be able to do things that you guys find helpful and good uses of your study time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to take off next week for Thanksgiving. We hope everybody has a safe and happy holiday, nice in a sort of a semi-post COVID world. You might be able to get out and see the fam and do that and continue on with your studies. Please do not bring your bar review materials to the Thanksgiving dinner table. That is a really bad idea, and that will get you in a lot of trouble with everybody around the table. But have a wonderful Thanksgiving, Megan. Have a great Thanksgiving. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. We'll see all of you back here. We'll have more news and information, answering questions, and some surprises next in 2 weeks. So with that, we're going to say bye-bye. We'll see you all in 2 weeks.
Yes, bye. Have some pie for me, everyone.
There you go.
Thanks
Bye-bye,
for listening
everybody.
and watching the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at celebrationbarreview.com.